Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is going to be a first impression / review video of a new anime series called, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Maoyuu Maou Yuusha. This was actually suggested to me by a friend of mine on Facebook, and they basically said, this might be something I'd really get into. And sure enough, after the end of episode 1, I really found myself digging it. Immediately, it reminds me of things like Final Fantasy in the setting and the fact that there's, swords and sorcery, demons, magic, and witches or mages, that kind of thing. It just seems like a really fun series. It's not too overly dramatic, but I get the sense that it could become so down the line, but it's also got a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. Now, basically you're following Hero, or number 1 Hero. They haven't really given him a name, although Wikipedia suggests the word Yuusha in the title is actually what means, or is equal to the word hero. And he basically is going single-handedly, he takes it upon himself to visit the kingdom of the Demon King. Now, when he gets there, he figures he's going to defrock, if you will, the Demon King, and all will be well with the world. He will bring about peace. And when he gets to this kingdom and he sees like nobody's really there, he ends up finding this beautiful woman with a set of horns who turns out to be said Demon King, who also, via Wikipedia, is suggested to be Mao. Now, what she basically does is say, I want you to be one with me. And this kind of throws him for a loop, of course. He's coming in there trying to be the white knight, the hero, and all of a sudden he's got this woman practically throwing herself at him. But then she outlines sort of the reasoning behind her offer. She wants a sense of peace, but she wants a peace for them both. And she has built within herself this whole idea of why this perpetual war between humans and demons, which is essentially what he was trying to bring an end to, needs to be perpetual. It needs to keep going, because essentially the nations of the world that are battling the demon hordes and so forth, they're being given, welfare by other nations that otherwise, if they weren't receiving, they would die. These people would suffer. And if either side of the factions, the demons or the humans, won, well, surely, she suggests, they would bring about oppression for the other side and slavery and suffering. So the way she sees it, she's worked it out in her mind that this war needs to continue despite what people believe. And it's not only that these nations could potentially suffer without the war, but there's a very interesting thing that she says about how, these politicians and these people, they'll get in trouble for doing all these raucous, bad, evil things, and then they'll blame it on the demons. So there is a touch of this, suspicion, at least in my mind, being a viewer. Could it be these demons, or who are claimed to be demons, aren't necessarily bad? I mean, is it just two nations and they're really misrepresenting themselves to each other? I don't know. And there comes a point where she tries to illustrate everything she's outlined by bringing out this sort of old-style candle thing, and she puts it in the hero's hand, and it starts to spin around, and all these multicolored lights emanate throughout this room, and it ends up showing his mind's eye, going back on his memories and showing it to them both. And he remembers being a young boy and just, going to these events, these parties, these gala balls and things like that, where people were just sharing in overabundance and peace and happiness and that kind of thing. And it kind of all calls back to what she's been saying, that these nations would falter without this war. It is just one step further that goes to, making him basically fall in line with her thinking. Now, as if that's not enough, she uses this thing to also show a side of her own mind, sort of this fantasy she has about a grassy hill and the peace that would follow on the other side of it. She wants to see and experience the world beyond it. So in a way, she's kind of opening herself to him as much as he has been opened to her, and it does seem to win him over. He does seem to really fall in line with this thinking. He says, this could be something that, results in bloodshed. Basically, he has friends who will be against this. There are factions who may be against this. it may be a tumultuous journey. And that's what's very interesting about it, because there is that humor in his being moved by what she's saying and also not really liking that fact that he's being so easily won over. And then you have these other characters you see peppered throughout the episode. You have this prince who is very sort of taken with his lot in life, the war that he has to oversee with his country. And much like what this Demon King woman has told the hero, his father comes to him and says, you know, you are troubled by this war, but we need it. Otherwise we would fail. We have no food, we have famine, and we would only prosper for this war to continue. It's a very interesting dynamic. And then, of course, you see some of the hero's former party in the form of a female warrior whose right-hand man kind of makes fun of the fact that her boobs are really small, whereas, of course, the Demon King, the woman who is the Demon King's, are very huge, and she kind of tries to use that against the hero, if you will, to seduce him. And there is a little bit of lowbrow humor, but luckily enough, it doesn't take away from the whole of the show. I don't really get into that kind of humor full on, and it's done well here, I think, where it's not obtrusive, it's not taking away from the rest of the episode. I do have to say I found it pretty hilarious that she ends up using that candle device that looks into the mind's eye and opens it to each other, and we end up seeing her accidentally grasp this thing and find out that she's been making out with a pillow version of the hero to practice and that kind of thing. And then, of course, you have this mage who is, you know, it seems like she almost has different personalities. I mean, on the one hand, she's sort of sleepy and bored. On the other hand, she's grumping about the fact that, you know, all this stuff is going on around her. And she seems like she could be a quirky character. And it's just a really fun show that, again, reminds me of things like Final Fantasy IX, especially, where it's kind of a kooky world, but there is also drama. And I have to say, the animation is just gorgeous in this series. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Les Chevaliers d'Eon in the style of it, the setting anyway, the period setting. But there are some really dynamic, just wraparound shots and things I haven't seen since the first episode of Sword Art Online. So, and this goes even beyond that as far as the many times that they do it in just this first episode alone. Essentially, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be doing episodic reviews. I think there's only 12 episodes for this series, which is a shame that that's how short it's going to be, but I can only imagine that each step of the way is going to be brilliant if this episode is any indication. And honestly, I just don't know as yet. I may end up doing an episodic review of this series, or I may do a sort of overview once it's all done. I'm definitely going to be watching it, and I'd love to hear from you guys what you thought of episode 1. If you've seen it, post that in the comments below, of course. And otherwise, I hope you look forward to my reviews of this series and others if I decide to pick up this one. And yeah, I hope you're all doing well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.